The views, comments, and opinions of the following program do not necessarily reflect those of Morris Media Studios, MorrisMediaLive.com, or its affiliates. Listener discretion is advised.
Blessed day, beloved. It's so good to see all of you with us. So glad you can join us for this special Faith Without Borders broadcast today, as we will be looking at a very, very important and significant issue, topic that we're going to be dealing with that affects so many lives in our communities. But before I introduce our topic today and the show, let me just start off by saying today is April the 27th. It is the Independence Day celebration for the land of my birth, the Republic of South Africa. And so I am, of course, filled with joy because as I go back to this day 27 years ago, I could only think of my parents who went to vote for the first time. I was in grad school then in Dayton, Ohio, and I went to Columbus, Ohio to vote, and was joined by several of my friends and colleagues and organizers that accompanied me that day on behalf of the many who fought for freedom in South Africa. And of course, this day, 27 years ago, we elected the first democratically elected president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela. And so it's a joyous experience. Angela Davis puts it this way: freedom is a constant struggle. And so in South Africa, we continue to struggle for freedom, as we build that new nation. And so I want to say to all of my South African sisters and brothers, and to all who fought for the liberation of South Africa. We had so many, from the United States, from California, right here from Los Angeles, who did that, and we celebrate that. I want to read you this quote from Nelson Mandela. I'm going to ask Felicia to put it up there again. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Certainly powerful, thought-provoking words from the icon, the father of our nation, South Africa, Nelson Mandela. And those words are true to us even today as we seek to navigate these turbulent and tumultuous time by way of this pandemic called COVID-19. We're all in it together. Let's do whatever it is that we need to do to make sure that we get there. It's the same with the topic that we're going to be dealing with today. This week, the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors declared this week as Re-entry Week. And so to commemorate that, we were able to pull together some warriors and some fighters on the forefront to see how we can restore the dignity and the humanity of sisters and brothers, who've made it beyond, the experience of prison. And so that's what we are going to be dealing with today. Also, as part of that, we want to tackle a very, very important, subject matter. I'll do that in a minute. As I just show appreciation to our co-sponsors for today, the Martin House, under the leadership of Pastor Joe Hamilton. Also, SCLC, Southern California, CEO and President, Pastor William D. Smart, as well as Community Health Councils, the Social Change Institute there, under the leadership of course, Veronica Flores, as well as Michelle Burton, Dr. Michelle Burton. So we're all here together in it, and we're going to examine, of course, as part of our time, to see how we can recognize, organize, and mobilize critical, significant, and sustainable community-based services and systems change around our theme for today, beyond mass incarceration, reimagination, restoration, and abolition. That's what we're going to get into today, and I could not have asked for a better panel to get into it with me. They've been on the front lines for so many, many, many years. And so today, I want to start off, ladies first, with a woman that I have so much respect and love for, and that is none other than Susan Burton. She is an author. Her book, of course, is Becoming, Miss Burton. Fascinating read. And Susan, I have this on my coffee table at home, just to let you know that book has made it over there. So whoever rolls up in there, they see that book. She's also the founder and the executive director of A New Way of Life, doing extraordinary work. And is not just a CNN hero, but she's one of my sheroes. So glad that Susan is able to be here with us. Elder Joe Paul is one who has been on the forefront around this for so many, years. Of course, through, Refuge Church, but also now he's the managing director of Lark, and he'll tell us about, what that regional body is, and just extraordinary work that they are doing. And then Pastor Joe Hamilton is with us. He's the executive director, founder and executive director of the Martin House, and looking forward to hearing all that that he's doing. I'm privileged to work with all of these individuals. And then, Brother Jay Jordan for Californians for Safety and Justice is not able to make it, but we were able to get one of our other comrades who transitioned from Community Coalition to Californians for Safety and Justice. Brother Gilbert Johnson will join us later on, so we can just get into it. So good to be here today. Glad once again for our co-sponsors. Let's get it on, as Marvin would say. So welcome. Good to see all of you. And let's start off by just asking a very, very general question. Susan, I'll start with you. When you hear Re-entry Week, what does that mean for you? As one who's been on the forefront of the re-entry revolution, that continues to sweep, LA city and county, the state of California, and the country. When you hear that the Board of Supervisors declared that, what does that conjure up in your mind?
So I'm really happy to see the Board of Supervisors actually declare and recognize reentry as calling it Reentry Week. But it goes much, much deeper and further than a week for me, Pastor Sauls, and much, much further than a week for this nation. I think of the history of incarceration and the history of this nation. And while again, I am grateful and thankful that the Board of Supervisors, acknowledged Reentry Week, but we have centuries of this problem for our communities, for our folks within this nation. So I just say that we need to focus on this for way more than a week and declare a reentry a national concern and problem in this country.
This challenge affects so many of our sisters and brothers, and it's not just, for me, it's really a trifecta, between the policies that are being made, the policing that's being done to enforce those policies, and then, of course, the prison industrial complex. So it's a 3P trifecta for me that adversely affects, the Black community. And that is why we wanted to, pull us together, around all of this. Elder Joe Paul, man, I appreciate you for what you're doing, in this, area. When you hear about Re-entry Week, some initial thoughts from you.
I echo what Susan has said off top, and I would just add, we're at a point in time, over the last, let's just say 15 years, but obviously the struggle has been longer than that. But in the last 15 years, thinking about all of the strides that have been made that seemed impossible at a point in time, like felons sitting on juries again, or parolees having the right to vote reestablished in their lives, or some of the egregious barriers that felony convictions have imposed on people now being removed to some degree with the amount of effort with individuals on this call and others that are probably watching. And to still be in a place where we have to acknowledge a special designation to address a second-class citizenship is still an issue. You know what I mean? We want to keep our foot on the gas. We appreciate every acknowledgement that dignifies the work that's happened. But, in the words of Nipsey Hussle the Great, the marathon still continues.
Absolutely. And again, freedom, the struggle for freedom is constant. And yes, this struggle certainly continue. And we're going to get into just the extraordinary work that we continue to be a part of here, in the county of Los Angeles, and we'll get to that. Joe, when you hear around, Re-entry Week, what does it mean for you? And then you can also tell us a little bit about the Martin House and our work there, with our brothers as we move forward with the conversation. Joe?
Thank you, and I appreciate being on the call with all you guys, the Zoom, and just to sit around those. Les Brown would say, always surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. And so I know I'm in definite good company today. But when I think about the Re-entry Week, I think about it from the standpoint of a practitioner who is laboring and working, or a liberator, I should say, as we celebrate, South Africa independence and Nelson Mandela. The idea of him as a liberator, I think that we all are in those shoes as well to help to liberate our people. But I think that this is just the genesis, right? Because if I look at it from my standpoint, I start thinking about, okay, so what is the city doing on behalf of reentry in terms of amplifying the voices of those that need to be heard more, but also from the standpoint of those who are looking for hope, individuals who are coming out of incarceration and they're hearing this Reentry Week. What does that actually mean and speak to them as well? And so I do think that this is a genesis. I think that there needs to be, folks like us a part of that table to see how we can have additional activities and celebrating, some of the achievements, but also, it will be a time to look at some of the obstacles and oppositions and opportunities that we have so that we can, together mobilize from our different organizations and then city agencies and whatnot to be more effective in this work to, as Joe Paul said, to raise the level of citizenship from second class to first class.
Indeed. The Martin House is a pretty unique place, and I have the privilege of being involved in the work that's being done there. And I appreciate Joe introducing me to that work several years ago when we were part of a Lenten tabernacle, and the Martin House became one of our focus, our missional focus for that. Tell us a little bit, seeing that this is about recognizing, significant, and impactful programs. Joe, tell us a little bit about, the Martin House and just how do we do what we do there as we engage, not just in re-entry, but in the restoration of the humanity and dignity of our brothers.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah. So the Martin House was really birthed out of a solution-oriented idea. It was, I had just sold my business, and I was standing in the pulpit and looking out, and had a conversation with the Lord, and said, "Where are our men?" And when I did the research, I found that in the inner city, that is, I found that a lot of our men are either incarceration or coming out of incarceration, or having some issues with substance abuse. And because of my history growing up with my father, who was in and out of prison, and on every drug that I could imagine, or that we can imagine, the answer was for me to go out and find out what could I do to help. That said, California, the Supreme Court had just ruled that overcrowding of California prisons was unconstitutional. And so there was a lot of talk about, the problem, but not so much, I didn't hear so much about the solutions. And so that's when I began to just make a personal investment to see what I could do to help men who are coming out, men and women, but specifically men for me, coming out of prison. And the biggest need that I found was that they needed housing. They needed safe housing. They needed, a consistent place where they could come in that was clean and safe, and an environment, right, that was conducive to wanting to be the best that they could be, not more of the same conversations and attitudes that they were getting, when they were in incarceration. So as doing that, my background, I'm a psychotherapist, so we do case management. We have a director of counseling who works with our guys first weekly and then monthly as they are, getting used or acclimated to being out. And then one of the other challenges I found in having conversations with Father G, we've got to, in terms of being a liberator, we've got to create opportunities for our guys. And so I've gone back and I've become a licensed contractor, because it's expensive to live in Los Angeles. And one of the things that we found, and I'm sure Susan can agree with me, you don't want to put somebody out of the house because they have been there so long, and they may be working and maybe only making $12, $13, $14 an hour, and they don't have enough to make it on their own. And they still may have some restrictions from parole that they can't, roommate with another, a parolee or whatever. And so really what we do is try to give guys employable skills, so that when they leave, they know that number one, they've had the experience, they have the education in terms of the skills, and then we pay them a wage that they wouldn't get. So our guys start out getting paid $20 an hour. A few years ago, they were getting paid $15 an hour. Then they moved to $17, $15, now $20. We have one of our guys is getting paid $35 an hour. But one of the things that I found is that when you pay people, and we understand that, once you make it to a certain level, income level, it changes the way you perceive yourself. Oliver Wendell Holmes says it this way: a mind stretched by a new idea can never go back to its original dimensions. And so now they know they can get paid $20 an hour. They know they can get paid $35 an hour. And so they begin looking for positions that will pay, somewhere around those levels. And so that, I believe that that's a part of the job of the liberator, to expand how people see themselves and to believe in them when they are having difficulty believing in themselves, but also creating the opportunities for them to grow and to spread their wings.
Yeah, and again, Martin House is just doing some effective work, and we'll hear some more about that. I want to bring in, talking about effective work and significant work, a new way of life. Certainly is such an organization, birth right out, of South Los Angeles, and Susan Burton is one who has done that and continues to do it. And I've just been glad to get to know her, work with her, support her, and just be together in this work of re-entry, restoration. Susan, I know you work with women. And just the work that you're doing, I never forget the story you tell about, being at that bus stop, whether it is the Greyhound bus stop or at Union, station, really looking out for and trying to meet, women who've been released, and to just take them from there and accompany them on their restoration. Can you tell us a little bit about, what A New Way of Life, what its mission is, and the work that it's been able to do and accomplish?
Yes. So I want to thank Brother Joe and Joe Paul for their for Brother Joe his personal investment and commitment to making a way for the guys to have a place to broaden their mind and to grow and to become the best that they can be. I just want to thank you so much. Just listening to you, it was just very heartwarming, reassuring, and effective to hear the route and what you're doing. And of course, Joe Paul is heading up the statewide work at the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership and doing great work and has been for quite some time now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what I wanna talk about is that women and the rates of women in incarceration, women being the fastest growing segment of the prison system. And a few years back, when I wrote my book, Becoming Miss Burton, we couldn't get conversation, real serious conversation, investment, or research in women. And I had been working with women coming home from prisons and jails, meeting them downtown at the Greyhound bus station for over 20 years. And I saw the problem. Uh, I saw the problem up close and personal through my own experience of stepping off a bus downtown Skid Row, no ID, nowhere to go, no investment in reentry, and having to try to figure it out and failing over and over and over again. Today, I know that the system was created for that failure and for us to become job security, for corrections, for us to continue to give them a reason to blow their budgets up. But now, with places like Martin House, with places like A New Way of Life, we are showing, we are turning the numbers around and showing that with a small investment in us and in our communities and in our people, it can be very, very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, you know, as much as we spend on incarcerating the men and the women and the children, there no way should there be this disparity in investment on the reentry side.
Mm-hmm.
But over and over again, we see this. And then that's why the work that Joe Paul is doing at LARP is so important, that we have a reentry organized advocacy voice that continues to push for the right electeds to be in the seats, to push for reallocation of dollars, to push and educate our community about voting and those resources coming back to our community.
Absolutely, and we all know, Joe Paul, that the focus, has to be on prevention, intervention, and then restoration, of course. And you and I are aware of the fact, that the intervention piece, in this society, that has an addiction to carcerality, that intervention side has been incarceration. right? Instead of just rehabilitation, around that, as we sought to institutionalize, people instead of humanizing, people. So, with what you are doing at, LAR, but even before you got there, I mean, you were at Shields, and of course the work that came out of, a refuge that you've done there. We've been part, of that work. LARP is more than just reentry. I mean, you at LARP basically, take care of that whole spectrum of prevention, intervention, and restoration. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because we know it's not just about programs, right? But it's also about policy. And LARP has positioned itself intentionally right in the midst of all of that, given the convening role that you play, the coordinating role that you play, around these three aspects of prevention, intervention, and restoration. Joe Paul?
Yeah, so thank you. And first of all, I'm humbled to be in this conversation during this particular week, and watching the throes of things occur as they are. I just think back to a period of time in the beginning in working with Susan, particularly, and her teammates, Josh Kim, Dorsey Nunn, a bunch of Linda Evans, Bonya Qualls, just all of these different individuals who have been pioneers in what we call now progressive reform. When I think about the first time I met Joseph Hamilton and his passion towards really creating something that was humane and productive in terms of bringing the best out of people's lives, particularly individuals at that point in time he was working with who were former lifers that really had a high hill to climb in terms of reintegration and the dignity and the grace that he was bringing to the table. And all of this grassroots effort, Susan's description of her experience prior to even formulating a new way of life, Joseph's life experience with his father, and what really drove him to be a person that was solution oriented, is really what LARP is about. The LA Regional Reentry Partnership is a platform, it's a network of passionate individuals that individually have been doing amazing work. But when you come to the table in a democratic society, it's really the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. And so a lot of times, one individual or a small contingency of individuals addressing issues that are very pertinent and probably chronic across other regions don't really get the response that they need, or you're put into the typical queue of bureaucratic funding sources and things like that that may not necessarily even meet the need that you're addressing, but that's what's available. About 10 years ago, at the inception of what we've transformed California into under the Public Safety Realignment Act, LARP emerged. And it was, again, at that point in time, a need to circle the wagons because things were shifting, and providers at the community-based level were ultimately going to be ostracized out of the conversation because probation and sheriff's department and other, more formalized institutions of public safety were getting the lion's share of the money. And so a bunch of individuals, Susan Burton particularly being a part of the original foundation of what made the brain trust of LARP what it is, Pastor Troy Bond, Lynn Lyman, Peggy Edwards, Mary Weaver, a bunch of people in the beginning, rallying, Doug Bond and Mark Fawcett, Michael Graveisen, just a bunch of people, Veronica Lewis, I could just go down the list, who are now real frontline champions in the work and their respective, points of views, recognize that we can do more together. And from that, hodgepodge or motley crew of individuals coming together saying enough is enough, over this 10 years, we've emerged into, organization that sits at the table with Governor Newsom. We sit at the table with, formerly Senator Kamala Harris, who's now vice president of the U.S., and countless other bills that have passed since that point in time that gives us this new horizon we're looking at. We're at the point now, and I can't wait for Gilbert to come on and talk about SB 731, which we feel is a milestone in the efforts that Why do we have this second-class citizenship in a country that was formulated off of second chances? Why do we still have, caveats within our constitutional governance that says that, emancipated slavery is legitimate except if you're incarcerated?
Mm-hmm.
And now we're moving at the level where we really can trust one another. We really can believe in the integrity of people's intention. And I believe the best is yet to come.
Mm-hmm.
Last week, for instance, that verdict that created a level of accountability on a global scale that, there are sanctions to police actions, that, we have to provide people their day in court, and that day in court should be just and fair. And if you violate that, you're not immune to criminal penalty.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's on us to continue to mobilize and continue to push the line that to the populations that were shared, whether it's the groups that utilize Joseph Hamilton's residential program, or whether it's the groups that use Susan Burton's, and the women that are touched so frequently by her work, that we all have to really mobilize and come together and keep our foot on the gas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was Angela Davis that, really, made a point many, many years ago of, how can we have a society without prisons? So we cannot, move away from this whole invitation to abolition, which is so important given the root causes, around how this is impacting and affecting, everyone, but especially, Black, Indigenous people of color, around that. And then, Michelle Alexander came along, with talking about, this whole piece about race control and the new Jim Crow. And then Ava DuVernay followed that with 13th, so just some powerful analysis around the system that's been put in place, of incarceration, of marginalization. And Isabel Wilkinson in her, new book, Caste, basically picks up where Michelle leaves off and saying that, yeah, the goal is to create, this caste, of folk who've been deprived of their rights, and whose humanity has been scarred in so many ways. And there's got to be, has to be a better way, as we balance accountability, with humanity. It's not an either or; it can be a both and. That's what restorative justice, is all about. I want to stick with you, Joe Paul, because I know that we have been, working together around just how can we, start somewhere and make a huge impact. And so it was all about, the juvenile justice system, and how do we, as a country, just continue to have a punitive response to the mistakes that our young people make, and what happened to youth development, right? And then the alternatives to incarceration, team came forward, and that was a collaboration between philanthropy, right, the California Endowment, the Board of Supervisors, government, Supervisor Mark Lee Thomas, and organizations, such as LARP and Community Coalition, as well as several other coalitions. And now we're at this place of really engaging in some serious systems change work and policy work that's long overdue and that's kicked in around. So, Joe Paul, can you, give us just a sense, just for those who don't even know what the alternatives to incarceration, that whole journey was all about, that has now, of course, moved into an implementation phase through Measure J. So can you just give us a sense, of where that work is, and how we can continue to make this push of bridging, significant programs on the one hand, with, a strategic policy that can actually move us, towards, true, restoration.
Yeah, so LA County is very interesting because it's one of the most condensed, large populated counties in the whole country. And based on, that dynamic, as far as 10 million people in one county and all the varying demographics and ethnicities and socioeconomic groups that make that body of people up, there's always going to be difference of opinion. But regarding the Alternatives to Incarceration initiative and the groups that formulated it, from the institutions to the philanthropy, with Dr. Bob Ross being so involved in the work, and then, as you mentioned, multiple coalitions of individuals engaging their voice. Um, was it perfect? No. But the fact that, a true democratic process, to the best of the circumstances, considering how things had normally been with, public safety institutions like probation and the sheriff's department and the DA's office, even having so much control and finality to how funds were distributed out or not, and no transparency in any of those interactions. The Alternatives to Incarceration initiative was a huge step in the direction of, community having a more sound voice, particularly the experts that were in the room, addressing the concerns that we had regarding the issues that made up, criminal justice and public safety, up to and including the faith-based community being at the table. And as a result of all of those recommendations that came out of the report that was finally issued from those multiple, almost year and a half convenings, we're now at the point we're looking at, there's a whole measure that's been instituted to, implement or at least actualize those thoughts. And again, it's still a check and balance, trial and error process, trying to come to terms with exactly how it works. But overall, the fact that the community has a voice, the fact that there's so many adjunct issues that are spilling out of the Measure J initiative now, in terms of the funding that's going to be allocated, the jail closure, the Men's Central Jail closure, and the discussions around that. All of these are efforts that have spawned out of the direct effort of community-based organizations and leadership that's been at the table, working offline with their board of supervisors and other elected officials statewide to say enough is enough, and being able to offset the experience with true data and results that reflect what the alternatives could possibly look like. I think, like Susan talked about it in terms of her organization and how effectively they're able to transition women into more stable lifestyles and have a non-traumatizing effect along the journey of accomplishing that. What Joseph is doing in dignifying individuals that have served, decades in prison, and empowering them with the skills that they have, not by going after, more grant money per se, but, creating initiatives of their own that actually support and then can be seeded by external money. So I hope that with the examples that are set, with the framework that Measure J is lining up, that, it does leave room for individuals who are innovative, that have real solutions to problems, that, we don't allow for the politicizing of what we're doing to affect or infect the outcomes that are so necessary for changing people's lives. I mean, COVID has done one thing for sure, is change the world. Where we fought so hard, as an example, to reduce the populations, even by legislation like AB 109, COVID did in 90 days. Now the state prison level is less than 100,000. The county jail level reduced itself, our LA County jail reduced itself from 17,000 daily average to less than 12. And that's with individuals who were pending state prison departure. And so how do we keep our foot on the gas with that? We keep our foot on the gas by holding accountable those individuals who are monitoring those proceeds that are going to be generated from Measure J, hearing the voice of people like who are on this call right now, and really empowering others that may not have necessarily been active community-based people or criminal justice reformers to now see that there is something afoot. And that's not just Black people, that's not just brown people, that's all people who have a sense of what humanity should look like. And I think, to me, that's what true democracy is. And I think, all of these things have created space for that.
One individual that has worked hard around this, Joe Paul, you and I know, is Gilbert Johnson, who worked,
Soldier.
yes, who worked, just so, he was just committed. He was on the forefront. He led, this work at Community Coalition, was part of the Justice LA Coalition, and now he is with Californians for Safety and Justice, and he's able to join us, right now. So I want to bring him in just to continue, Joe, where you left off, just around the work of systemic change. Whether it was fighting not for a jail to be built, that was a tremendous win, for us here in Los Angeles County, and see how we can redirect, those resources to be for prevention, to be for rehabilitation and intervention and restoration. And so I want to just give Gilbert an opportunity. Then I'm going to circle back, to Susan and Joe. But I want to just ask Gilbert just to tell us a little bit about the work that he's done while at COCO, and he has already, had an impact while at Californians for Safety and Justice. So Gilbert, thanks for joining us. I know you're running in between, a lot of meetings, but glad you could be here to kind of just, represent and just give your thoughts and insights on this. Gilbert, welcome.
Hey, no doubt, man of faith. Just want to always open up with gratitude. So thank you, Pastor Sauls, for allowing me space amongst these amazing justice leaders. Joe Paul, you already know, bro. Susan, Burton, we've been in the trenches doing a lot of work, and nice to meet you, Brother Joseph. And yeah, that's the nature of the beast. We always have 20 million things going, but we got to make time for what matters. And you already know, Brother Sauls, we go back. I got your back. I know you got mine. And so, man, it's been a ride. From the the sheriffs to end the coalition to end sheriff's violence, which Patrice Cullors started when I first got to COCO, and just to see that work and how it transformed to where we now have, the Civilian Oversight Commission for the Sheriff's Department, how that really transformed into the Justice LA Coalition, which was made up of powerful leaders in the criminal justice reform field, the Dignity Empowering Nows, the COCOs at one point, ACLU, so many organizations coming together to build that collaborative muscle. That's how we've gotten as far as we've gotten here in LA County. And it's always one point I always like to lift is that what we do here kind of trailblazes other areas. So now that I'm with Californians for Safety and Justice and doing statewide work, I just found out that in Fresno, they're doing work to shut down a jail expansion plan. And, Sacramento has the Sacramento Black Wall Street. And I'm learning about other organizing efforts and how a lot of people have, LA in a spotlight. So LA County really does set the tone and set precedents for the rest of the state and the rest of the country in many ways. And so just, making sure that we are elevating the voices of our people that are most proximate to the issues, to the issue of mass incarceration, to the issue of over-incarceration, the over-reliance of law enforcement and probation and parole, rather than the strategic investments that our communities really need that focus on anti-poverty and, tearing down poverty, addressing the crime and violence through community-driven efforts, community public safety efforts. That work, I've been engaged in a lot of that work, about the South LA Community Safety Initiative, where we were doing emotional emancipation circles in every hood across South Central. And we showed that we were actually able to reduce crime by hiring our people that are system impacted, formerly incarcerated, former gang members. Some are even still gang members, but they're, still finding a way to connect with their community and help folks see the bigger picture, help folks understand organizing, social justice, racial justice, equity, everything that we talk about now. But it's just been decades of organizing that got us to this moment. And so, so much work, so much work, so many people stepping out of their comfort zones and going to the hearings, going to the town halls, canvassing, phone banking, like all of that deep organizing work really has us in this moment where now we're working to shut down Men's Central Jail. The Board of Soups just approved 117 million to get that process going. Alternatives to incarceration, how that led to Measure J, which I heard Brother Joe Paul mention it. So I won't beat that drum, but just last week, Supervisor Solis and Holly Mitchell put forth a motion to support our legislation, and I say our because LARP is a co-sponsor, New Way of Life is a co-sponsor, Homeboy, ARC, but our current legislation will actually completely clean and seal old conviction records, old rap sheets for folks, millions of people across the state. And so this is as if like they never committed a crime. Just think, Joe Paul, myself, Susan, when we pass sunsets or Senate Bill 731, we will no longer have anything on our background record. And it's just a true game changer. It's never been done. It's historic. And a lot of people are going to benefit from that because it's retroactive. And so I just wanted to put that context out there. How we got to this moment is through the power of the people, the collective will and collective values, shared values of our people, and the community coalitions, the New Way of Lives, the LARPs, the folks that are doing the day-to-day needed work to make sure that our people are at the forefront of this movement and of this justice reform movement. So I don't know if it's anything else. We working on a bunch of bills with CSJ, so I can give high level, kind of points around those. But yes.
Yeah, no. Thanks, man. It was so important, for us at Community Health Councils. We work very hard to bridge, programs with policy, because we all know it is in the end about systems change, and that's why it's just so great to see, Martin House, New Way of Life, the leadership of those organizations connecting with LARP and then connecting with, CSJ, to see how can we, facilitate systems change. Because in the end, and part of it is to work with folk, who are in proximity of the pain, such as, a Susan Burton in the work that we're doing. And Susan, you and I know in South Los Angeles, the strategy has been, continues to be, all about, the drivers of disparity, which on the one hand is about under-resourcing a community, and on the other hand, it's about over-policing, a community, and through that, making sure that we have beds in the heads, heads in the beds of our prisons, and our jails, and just the breakdown and the destruction that takes place around that. So, Susan, given the work that you've been doing, from programs to policy, any other thoughts you have in terms of how do we look at more solutions-driven programs and policies as we continue, to move towards beloved community?
So, Pastor Sauls, because of, I believe, the great writings and also the videos that have surfaced, when I say writings like Michelle Alexander, Angela Davis, Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, just I could go on and on and on. There's a new book called Halfway Home that describes the struggle of people re-entering. And then I must put in Becoming Miss Burton, because my goal there was to bring women into the conversation. But because of that, I think our whole nation is a bit more woke. and the propaganda of the 60s, 70s, 80s that came in after the civil rights movement, has been broken apart some. Uh, but during the pandemic, as Joe Paul mentioned, our numbers around incarceration locally in our county jails did go down. But what I want to alert our community that now they're going back up,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to, and they went down without a rise in crime. They went down with the community meeting our folks' needs and bringing them in and keeping them safe. And we must continue to stand up and rise up and demand this shift in resources on many levels. So I'm a great advocate for community taking care of community. That does not mean government taking care of community, because they come in at all levels with tactics of suppression. So when you look at probation and parole and what they actually really do for the folks that are coming back into the community is next to nothing. And I keep questioning it. Why do we have these suppressors and these overseers and these people that don't add any value to the lives of folks that are coming home, but they have this oppression and suppression tactic? So I'm like, give us our life back.
Mm-hmm.
Do away with parole and probation. Give us those resources that we can better usher people into the community, support them to have dignity, support them to live by principles, support them to be their best selves, and invest in our communities. Pastor Sauls, I look over the years, every year we take our residents on trips, be it to Sacramento, be it to Palm Springs, be it to New York, and they have to go to their parole officer and get this thing they call a traveling pass. And I'm like, that's what we did during slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And then the traveling pass says, keep this on you at all times. And I just get furious. Why do they need a traveling pass in the 21st century? But what I just want to say is that we must continue to um, pray into action, walk into action, stand next and with our brothers and sisters, press back on oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I want to shout out to Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. They have some legislation that they're introducing in our legislature, in our state legislature, to end involuntary servitude. And I'm all the way with that, because Pastor Sauls, when I reflect back, and it's painful to say this,
Mm.
there is not a generation in my family who has not worked as a slave in this country. That's including me, the generation after me, because of the laws of involuntary servitude. And so, it's just not over. And when I say that it pains me, it hurts really, really deeply to say that, but it's the reality of what happened to me and my labor after a policeman killed my son,
Mm.
and I used drugs to cope with the grief. I was imprisoned, and I was made to work, and my labor was exploited by the Department of Corrections.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I don't know if all of that made sense, because I kind of
Yeah.
went all over the place.
No.
But give us our community back, give us our people back in parole, probation, and stop thinking that the state or the government can deliver what we need, because what we need is for them to get up off our neck and give us our freedom.
My Lord. Look, Susan, you all over the place connecting the dots, for us that we cannot be, numb to and silent to the fact that, this is a system of dehumanization and discrimination, which results in exploitation, and that exploitation in the end, really destroys, families and disrupts communities in so many ways. That's why I just love SCLC and that co-sponsorship, because they are carrying on the legacy of Dr. King, which was all about a beloved community characterized by racial justice, as well as equitable systems in what it is that we are called to do. So thank you for that. And again, you are just an example around the power of proximity and lived experience. As we work on these the legislative pieces, and all that's before us. Before we lose, Gilbert. Gilbert, can you just, I know we just, moved on time done. You may want to say a little bit about that, but just quickly, give us, before we lose you, to your next, meeting, just some of the other, legislative pieces that we are looking at, whether it's in the county of Los Angeles or the state of California, and, even nationally, but at least, those two, areas, county and state.
All right. So I'll start at the state level, because that's where I'm focused. A lot of my work is focused now. So as you probably know, Californians for Safety and Justice is made up of kind of two arms. So you have Time Done, which is really working on Senate Bill 731, also known as Sunsets. So I talked a little bit about that. There's a sister bill with that, AB 1308, that we're currently working on, which will make sunsets retroactive. So if anybody is going through the process, like with Prop 47, I was able to reduce one of my felonies to a misdemeanor and then get it expunged, which expungement really doesn't do anything because it still shows up on your record. And that's one of the distinguishing characteristics of our current sunset bill, because the bill will only be able to be opened up if you, as of right now, we're going to stick to it because, carve outs happen and bills get weakened, but we're pushing a hard line to keep our bottom lines there in the bill and keep the bill strong as possible. But if you apply to be law enforcement, or if you want to be a police officer, then they can reopen your bill, open your rap sheet and look at your old convictions. But literally, like any other sector of work, it won't show up. Your old records won't show up once your background is cleaned and sealed. And so this also extends to folks with violent priors. So that's another key element to the bill, because there's a lot of conversation, like Prop 47 focused on low-level nonviolent crimes, right? 999s, but you can literally have a body on your background. And if you've completed your sentence, if you've paid your debts, your fines and fees and all of that stuff, and there's a 2-year kind of like phase out period in that 4 to 5 year period, then you will automatically qualify to get your record completely cleaned and sealed. And the 1308 piece makes it where you don't have to go and fill out a bunch of paperwork like what I was alluding to with Prop 47, where I filled out this whole form. Something was wrong on it, a little tweak on it. They sent it back and I had to go back and do it all over again. Then I had to go to this floor, get an affidavit, go back down here, submit it. And so all that going through the hoops to get your record clean, 1308 will make it retroactive and actually place it on the state. So the state will have to make that happen. So it's huge. It's huge in so many ways. And then so that's sunsets. And then just to talk like our other larger bill on the Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice side, which is CSSJ, the other arm of CSJ, is Senate Bill 299, which is it's a bill from Senator Connie Leva, and basically it removes barriers faced by victims of police violence and other violent crimes in California. So right now, if the police shoot someone, their family is basically left to fend for their own. If you know about victims of crime or crime survivors, victim services, victims compensation, if there's a community violence, if there's a drive-by and somebody gets killed, then that family, the family of the person who got killed is actually can access victim services. So like trauma services, even financial resources. And it's a whole lot of work that needs to be done in that, because even they have barriers. Like if you have a background, you can't access those services. And that's a whole nother beast. But right now with police violence, folks that have been impacted by police violence will have access to the same services and to the same resources that are highly critical in any death, right? But when it's state sanctioned violence, right, the people that are supposed to be protecting and serving us with LAPD is killed. Oh man, it's crazy. Just since the beginning of the year, we're in like 30 number, 40 number, and that's increasing. So that is so important to also extend those services and that help and assistance to people that have been impacted by police violence. So that's SB 299. And then I talked about SB 731. I mean, there's a couple other ones. There's a bill around bail. There's a bill around bereavement. So, where AB 95, it protects workers' rights to take unpaid bereavement. And which is also beneficial. But those are like the two high level bills that we're working on right now.
That's excellent. We want to lift up SB 299, SB 731, AB 1380, and AB 95. And I know we'll get some more, as we look at how do we bridge programs and policy so that we can, get to the reclamation of lives by way of systemic transformation. That's so key. And that's, of course, one of the goals of this, re-entry week, for us. Gilbert, thanks for joining us. I know you have to roll, but glad you could able to tap in and be part of this conversation. I want to bring in, Pastor Joe, because you and I know that one of the key pieces, and we talked about this whole, involuntary, servanthood that takes place in, the prison system, that, for guys and also for women, it's all about, how do we make sure that folk have a legitimate source of income, right? As they're coming up, because they're coming up without an ID. You almost have to reestablish yourself, really at all levels, including relational, with family and friends and community, right? And I know the Martin House really zooms in as part of the programming there around how to, move folk, into, developing skills that can then turn into careers, for them. Pastor Joe Hamilton, say a little bit about that aspect of the Martin House, just as, again, another solution that we're working on over there around restoration. Okay. I don't know what.
I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
So let me just take a moment to give a sociological context for the work that we are doing with our men and attempting to do even greater things than what we're doing. Jay Jordan and I were in Oklahoma a week and a half ago, and we were just talking about the work, and he asked the question, and he always asks this question: do you believe that humans should be behind bars? And that's an interesting question that most people will fail to answer, because when you actually think about it, and we know from research that when what you hear about yourself and how people treat you and the lack of dignity impacts your perspectives, which then translates to self-efficacy, what you actually believe that you are capable of. In the Planet of the Apes, there's a scene where Caesar, who is the lead ape, and he's with his owner, and they're walking, and he has him on a leash. And Caesar looks over and sees a dog on a leash, and it changes. Literally, you can see the change in his perspective about not only himself, but also his perspective in those that are supposed to be there to help him, which is the case of, we know that the system impacted people. And so we have to, recognize the power of our narrative, that our stories, everybody has a story to tell. The question is, do we feel like our story is valuable, and do we speak it not only loud enough, but quantitatively enough? Do we tell it enough? And so I think that that's what we have to do. But, in terms of the work that we're doing with our men, is just giving them, as Joe Paul alluded to earlier, and even Susan, giving people a sense of dignity, recognizing that their life they actually matter as a person, regardless of what they can bring to the table at this point, because it's really not, where you start, is how you end up. And so we all have to start somewhere, and recognizing, letting people know that they're cared about, giving them a sense of dignity, but also a sense of value. There's a saying that I think it's Goethe, he's an old philosopher, he says, if you treat a person the way they are, they will only get worse. But if you treat them as they should be, they will become what they can be. And that's what our objective is with our men, to raise them up, to see themselves in a better light than they did before, to see themselves more capable and more able. So that means that we have to, I talked about earlier, create those opportunities. So right now we're working with construction, but I'm also working right now to see about doing we were invited to do some things with Amazon. So, because not everybody can do construction. So we want to, really create opportunities, and I would hope that out of this conversation, this broad conversation, that all of us here on this Zoom meeting will come again and convene again and begin to have some more specific dialogue, with inviting others, so that we can begin to strengthen this alliance of, not only people who are helping to impact policy, but us on the grassroots that are helping people, on the streets.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. I want to let you guys know we've had several great shout outs, on Facebook. Our brother and colleague and comrade, Jose Osuna. You all know Jose is giving us some shout outs, and he says we ought not to forget that supportive housing is very, very, important. We also have folk joining us from Windhoek, Namibia, from Cornerstone Tabernacle Church there, the restorative work that they're doing, over there, Pastors Jeff, the Pintos, that's there. So thank you for joining and being part of the conversation. Of course, our folk out of South Africa, Beloved Community Coalition, the work that's going on there with system impacted individuals, and how to make sure that true restoration is going on. And I know that Hamilton, Martin House, and A New Way of Life, we are connecting internationally, because this is a global challenge around incarceration, and I know it's very challenging in South Africa as well. As we, move to conclusion, Susan, you kicked us off by saying, hey, this is not just about Re-entry Week. It's about how do we commit our lives, to the work of re-entry and the work of restoration. Share with us just some final thoughts. I'll start with Susan, and then I'll go to Pastor Joe Hamilton, and then I'll come back to Elder Joe Paul. Just some final thoughts. As we look at, how do we move beyond incarceration? How do we, engage in reimagination? How do we engage in restoration and even abolition? As we, it doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable, but it doesn't mean that accountability has to result in robbing people of their humanity and their dignity. So, Susan, you want to share some final thoughts as we continue our work together?
Yeah, Pastor Sauls, thank you so much for this opportunity. In 1998, I left treatment after serving 6 prison sentences for substance use. And I worked a minimum wage job and saved up enough money to get a little bungalow in Watts and start a New Way of Life reentry project. With that little investment in in what was a desert for reentry in 1998, we've grown to over 10 homes across LA County, and we began to train people nationally and internationally. And so I'm thinking about what a small investment can do in the transformation of communities and families. Through a New Way of Life, we've served over 1,400 women. We've mentored over 18 organizations in the U.S., one in Kenya and one in Uganda, to replicate our model, which has a 4% recidivism rate. So I want to go back to what I originally started with, what a small investment can do in the transformation of people, communities, and the whole idea about, reimagining what can happen. I think we should need to have homes for men and women all across this nation, all across this nation. And I'm committed to do it. I'm a little old now, but I still got a little kick in me. So, we are holding trainings, and we just want to train up everybody and support them to usher our folks back home, push the money out of probation and parole, stand our people up with dignity, because that suppression and oppression and subjecting our folks to all the reporting and requirements and traveling passes, and I mean, that's BS. Excuse me, but that's BS. Mm-hmm. So we want to reclaim our communities and stand up and become whole again. Get the colonizers, or what they say in Wakanda, get the colonizer out of our community.
All right, now you're adding a new word there, Susan, reclamation. We're gonna take reclamation and add it too. You got 3 preachers on here. We pick up on that stuff. So thank you. All right. Pastor Joe Hamilton, your final thoughts.
There we go. Thank you, and thank you, Susan, for your vision for a new way of life, and not only a new way of life, but even those organizations that you mentor. I do believe, and I see, normally I do training, and Pastor Sauls, I work with a lot of different companies to build capacity throughout the nation. And one of the things when I'm talking to leaders is I always need to ask them a question: what is your vision? What is your vision for your organization? What's your vision for your agency? And I believe that that's important because, humans, we're goal oriented. We need to have a target that we're aiming at in order to go in a productive direction. And so one of the things that research has shown is that the more support people have, the more successful they are. It doesn't matter whether it's in business or education or athletics. The more support people have, the better off they are. And so it's no mistake that there are over 40-some thousand policies that restrict and take away support of those that are formerly incarcerated, because they know the more support they get, the more successful they're going to be. And the less they get, the less successful. So, I believe that we have to begin to speak our narrative. We have to begin to articulate the research in diplomatic ways so that people can become empathetic to the populations that we serve, and to continue to mobilize to support people. There are people, we know that the county jail is the largest mental health facility in California. There are people who need to have mental health services instead of incarceration. And so we need to deal with the abuse and the trauma that people have experienced. And as Susan said, I'm also committed. I believe I'm a young man, but I'm midway there. And for Joe Paul, when we first met, I knew this brother was committed, and I've always loved the fact that he does his best to lift others around him. And then you, Pastor Sauls, we connected years ago, and we kept seeing each other in these civic meetings and different things, and finally we connected. But we have had this kinship and this alignment in philosophy in terms of the liberation of our people. And so I just look forward to us continuing to have these discussions. And I just want to say that when we look at in the 60s, the civil rights movement, there was a lot of discussion that was happening. And what you find is that when we stop talking about it, our movement stops. Mm-hmm. And so we have to continue our discussions about the reform that needs to happen, continue our discussions about and reimagining new ways to support people instead of incarcerating them, so that they can give them a chance to have a hand up, and to push them back and then to take resources from them. So I'm just looking forward to the ongoing dialogue and the work. And the last thing I'll say is that, just having this conversation with you guys, I love it because there is such a sense of humility. J. Paul talked about it earlier, but there is such a sense of humility and authentic and genuine concern for people. And that I love, but ultimately the God I serve, he says, Jesus, he says, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And I believe that when we begin to love people the way that Christ loved us, we can change this city, this state, nation, and world.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well said. Joe Paul, any thoughts that you have?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the conversation today. Faith speaks what it believes. And faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. I've watched, and I must, just take one pause and say thank you, Susan Burton, for embracing me from day one. When I was new to the game and just had a passion that things didn't have to look the way it looked, and just wanted to register people to vote who were in jail. Susan and her team were one of the first groups that got behind me and and really believed in that work. And then Dorsey Nunn, who she mentioned earlier. And now, all these years later, 15 years later, we're looking at all these bills that have passed that were just things that we imagined at that time. You know, voter rights being established. Again, felons being able to sit on juries. Marijuana now legalized, where we're not criminalizing people for the most smallest things. You know, 3 strikes being addressed in terms of people being able to come home who had nonviolent sentences. And now looking at ACA 3, looking at this involuntary servitude issue written into our Constitution that justified a continuation of servitude. In other words, slavery. And I think Susan's point was so well taken about this traveling past and the control and just the dehumanizing sense of a grown person having to report to somebody else who really doesn't have the interest in really helping them. It's just control. I leave everyone with this thought. With all of those things I just said and the work that we've established in, you know, demonstrating our power at the polls, now we move past the conversation of simply reentry as an intervention, and we move to the idea of healthy communities. Mm-hmm. We move to a position of thinking about all the contributing factors that consistently limit people's ability to mobilize and create in community. And so healthy communities to me is looking at certain vital signs that represent the ability for a person to sustain their life, you know, pay bills, have adequate health care, have access to education, buy a home, create generational wealth. Like these things we have an opportunity to build on now, moving past this give us a little bit, sir, give us a little bit, ma'am, to Susan's point about systems, and now moving to really what the United States of America was built off of, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. And I think looking at the capacity of building these healthy communities is a real reality before us. There's so many pieces of evidence that we need to work off of. You know, there's frameworks that teach us the elements that give us the clues on if we stabilize in this area, if we deal with the criminogenic needs, if we deal with the protective factors that we know lead to neglect or abuse within homes, if we deal with the social determinants of health, if we deal with these models that already exist and start really applying ourselves around it and have the adequate support financially and otherwise, we can transform our communities to where reentry is not even a conversation any longer. Yeah. And to me, that would be the greatest form of abolition, right? Not just closing the jails, but eliminating the spirit that led to where we are. And so I'm just grateful for this conversation. I pray that something was said and it's, you know, planted in the minds of and the hearts of the people who are listening that we build off of as a community. And so just grateful to be a part of the conversation today.
Thank you so much. To Elder Joe Paul, who is the Managing Director of the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership, Susan Burton, Founder and Executive Director of A New Way of Life, and Pastor Joe Hamilton, who is the Founder and Executive Director of the Martin House. And also today we were joined by Gilbert Johnson, who is with Californians for Safety and Justice. We want to just thank you for joining us today, you know, for this conversation around beyond mass incarceration. I want to also thank our co-sponsors, Community Health Councils, as well as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Southern California, as well as the Martin House, you know, for this opportunity. Want to give a shout out to our Supervisor Holly Mitchell, who together with Supervisor Hilda Solis, you know, sponsored, you know, the legislation for Re-entry Week. And we know this is, you know, the continuation of the courageous and compassionate work of so many people, and glad that we were able to be a stream into this river of transformation. Thank you all so much for joining us. Just to close out, you know, it is not ironic that we are meeting on, you know, South African Freedom Day or South African Independence Day, thinking of, President Nelson Mandela, and one of our co-sponsors, is the Southern Christian Leaders Conference, who is, was founded by, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the folk, who are on this Faith Without Borders are all people of faith. Those two men, they've been affected by incarceration. Of course, Nelson Mandela, 27 years, King several times, and their writings, continue to be an inspiration and an instruction for all of us, especially the letter from Birmingham jail, of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where he talks about that we are all inextricably connected, in a single garment of destiny. So that sense of intersectionality and intentionality is key around, how, we respond to this society of carcerality called the United States of America. We shall overcome. We must overcome if we are to reach beloved community. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been Faith Without Borders. I'm your host, Pastor Kelvin Sauls. Let's continue to keep on keeping on, because freedom is a constant struggle.